Black Lives Matter. Well, here is another black life. His name is Collins Kosa. He was 40 years old, and he was also killed by police just last April. In fact, police beat him to death. And here's the irony, they beat him to death for allegedly breaking coronavirus bans. That was a health risk, so beat him to death. So why haven't you heard about Collins Kosa too? Why not a single protest or even news story here about him? Well, that's because Kosa was beaten to death not by white police officers in America, but by soldiers and police in South Africa. And, of course, that's of no interest to the left. There's no political mileage there. Just as there was no interest when Minneapolis police, the very same force that killed George Floyd, murdered Australian Justine Damon in her pyjamas after she called for help. So, do all black lives really matter to the protesters? Well, Ari Yemeni, a provocative activist, went to find out at the Melbourne protest on Saturday.
Got shot dead by an African American. Is that just as bad or not?
No, it's not.
It's just the amount of people that are like, all lives matter. It's like, yeah, okay.
Does all lives matter?
Not right now.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I'd have to say that's a bit of white supremacy, is it not? You know, that's not...
Why is it white supremacy?
Well, because she's white.
How many Indigenous Australians have been killed in custody?
Over 432 since 1991.
How many white Australians have been?
Again, I'm not making this about white or black. Black people are overrepresented in the justice system and are killed in custody. This isn't black versus white.
But it kind of is, because it says Black Lives Matter, so it is.
Yeah, I'm talking about black lives.
Well, that was from the Melbourne protest, which was held despite that state having the country's most insanely tough coronavirus bans on mass gatherings. The Labor government initially said protesters wouldn't even be fined at that protest. Then it backtracked. But even then, the head of its Office for Women in Sport and Recreation, Brady O'Donnell, tweeted, "Today there were powerful, peaceful protests across Australia that shouted to the world that Aboriginal lives matter. I'm relieved that of thousands who attended, none were arrested, and that many more made the decision not to attend, but will pay the rent," as in pay Aboriginal activist groups money for the privilege of being here. And she added that she was proud of her young nieces for going to the protest. Joining me is Tim Smith, Education Spokesman for the Victorian Liberal Opposition. Tim, thanks for your time. This woman is a doctor as well as a public servant. Should she be tweeting support for a protest that breaks all the government's own coronavirus rules?
No, of course she shouldn't be. And I hope she deletes that tweet and I hope she apologises for it. And you'll be interested to know, Andrew, that Dr Annalise Van Diemen, the Deputy Health Officer in Victoria, has deleted her Twitter account after a number of Liberal MPs, including myself, wrote to the Public Sector Commissioner asking for her to be disciplined for her political advocacy during this pandemic. I mean, public servants are entitled to their views, but they're not entitled to tweet political slogans and indeed ideas that contradict the elected government of the day. And at the end of the day, the Chief Health Officer of Victoria and indeed the Chief Medical Officer of the Commonwealth, Brendan Murphy, said people should not protest, they should not gather in large groups. In fact, the law in Victoria is very simple. Only 20 people can gather at any one time outside as we speak. Yet 10,000 people...
It's incredible.
10,000 people, 10,000 people gathered on the steps of Parliament House on Saturday, and not a single one of them have been charged with a thing yet. Not one single fine.
Oh, I think the organisers...
it is outrageous.
No, Tim, I read somewhere that the organisers had been fined, but no one else. Now, I guess what the police are saying and what the police minister was saying before the event, oh, look, you know, if police go there and start fining people, it'd be provocative and, you know, it's a public safety issue, there might be a flare-up, which doesn't say much for the political temper of the protesters, let me tell you, that the government is acknowledging they're thugs, or a number of them might be. But what should they have done? I mean, you might be in government after the next election. What should have been done?
Well, the message to begin with should have been, Of course it should have been, if you turn up, you'll be fined. So the message from the get-go should have been, you must not do this. Like the messaging has been with regards to, for example, seeing your mother on Mother's Day, or indeed the messaging, or indeed the messaging around ANZAC Day. ANZAC Day is cancelled. You must not turn up at your local RSL or your local cenotaph. The only way that you can pay due recognition to the 100,000 Australians who died in all wars is to light a candle and to stand on the end of your driveway at the end of your street. That's the messaging that should have occurred about this protest. You must not protest. You're endangering the lives of other citizens if you do. You will be fined if you turned up. Well, no, it was none of that. It was, oh, well, you know, this is a very important cause and, you know,
Exactly
we understand
correct.
why people are passionate about this and therefore if you turn up, please be socially distant, all this sort of rubbish. Well, we don't live in a democracy at the moment. There's one rule for the mob and another rule for the rest of us that abide by the laws of the land. I just think it stinks to high heaven.
I've actually seen police break up an ANZAC Day ceremony by protesters against these laws at the time and fine people. But they broke that up, an ANZAC Day ceremony, but not this one. Now, finally, Tim, we're living in AFL Central. AFL Central, right? The whole country, this is AFL Central, MCG in Melbourne. What does it say about the bans on crowds at AFL games that will start this weekend? That we had this protest allowed, but not AFL games, when in fact an AFL official, Tanya Hirsch or whatever her name is, marched in one of these protests on the weekend, but we can't have a crowd at an AFL game.
It shows you that this is all politics, that this is all rubbish, that frankly the government has lost control of this situation. And I want to go to the football. Today is usually the annual Melbourne versus Collingwood Queen's birthday match. If we'd called it the annual protest against Collingwood, could we have gone to the football perhaps?
Of course you could. Of course you could. Yeah, if you'd gone there with a Nicky Winmar gesture, you'd have got in. I mean, this is just the hypocrisy of it here. There is, as you say, it's not one law for everyone now. If you're on the right political cause, you're allowed so much more freedom than if you're on the wrong side in this under this particular regime. Tim